Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us.
Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. I'm your co-host, Holly, and I'm so glad you joined us. Today, I'm so honored to share with you an episode I got to record with Ashely Opliger. Ashely is the founder and executive director of Bridget's Cradles, a nonprofit ministry dedicated to providing comfort, hope, and healing to families grieving the loss of a baby in heaven. Bridget's Cradles was born out of the tragic loss of Ashely's daughter, Bridget, during her second trimester of pregnancy. Ashely shares her story with candor, grace, dignity, and such love for those experiencing miscarriage and infant loss. We talk about the moment she knew God called her to use her grief to fulfill His call on her life, how she walks with other women in their grief, and how people close to those hurting can be a support. Ashely also shares how her nonprofit ministry grew, how they encourage and uplift their volunteers, and how they have been able to be so impactful on such a small budget. While this episode may be difficult for some to listen to, I want to encourage you to take your time with this episode. While infant loss and miscarriage is a hard subject to talk about, God shows up in this conversation in such a comforting and real way. Ashely shares some powerful reminders for those of us who support others in grief, and her story of healing, I believe, can bring hope for those walking this hard road. I'm praying this episode gives you hope that healing is available when you surrender your pain to God and trust Him with your most vulnerable places. Well, welcome, Ashely, to the podcast. We are so happy that you are here with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so happy to talk to you and get to know you a little bit better, your leadership journey and kind of what you do. So if you could start us off right now to tell us a little bit about what your life and leadership look like right now.
Yeah. So right now I am leading a nonprofit that's based in Wichita, Kansas. It's called Bridget's Cradles. It was founded in memory of my daughter in heaven, Bridget. So this is my role. I'm the executive director and president, and I do this part-time at the moment. I have two little boys, a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old. And so even though I was doing this in a full-time capacity before, I'm part-time, and we have other amazing volunteers that lead this with me. I actually was a speech language pathologist, and that was what my bachelor's and master's degree was in. And I had been practicing as a speech pathologist for 5 years. And then when I got pregnant with Bridget and then had complications in my pregnancy, and she ended up stillborn at 24 weeks into my pregnancy. And that's a whole story of how God created the cradle through my mom knitting it and started the nonprofit. But I wasn't in nonprofit leadership prior to this. I did work for a nonprofit when I was a speech pathologist, but it was just really neat how God was able to use different experiences with different nonprofits in my speech pathology days. I had gone on a mission trip to Africa with a nonprofit that trained up audiologists and speech pathologists to go to Kenya and Zambia. And so I had various experiences with nonprofits, but none in a leadership capacity. And so my journey, I guess, to being a leader was a different one, but it was something I felt like God equipped me for and has slowly been, teaching me. And I think it's a lifelong journey of learning and growing and all of that, but that's where I'm at right now.
Oh, sounds like you've got a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
So, what are some leadership lessons that you've learned along your journey? And maybe start with when you actually knew you were a leader.
Yeah. So many things. I think, first of all, when you become a leader, and I think, first of all, just realizing that you don't have to be an executive director or a president of a nonprofit to be considered a leader.
Mhm.
Leadership is when you have influence. This is actually coming from my pastor, Pastor Craig Gershell, who has his own leadership podcast. He always says, if you have influence, then you're a leader, you're leading people. So you don't have to be at the top of an organization or at the top of a business to be a leader. And so just recognizing that, you do have leadership capabilities that God has given you in whatever capacity that you're in. And so for me, I really had to learn so much about what it was to be a leader and what it was to be in this role in a nonprofit. Like I told you, I didn't come from any sort of training or background in it, but just realizing that, God calls us when we're unqualified, but he equips us. He gives us the people and the resources and the tools. And it's a lifelong journey of learning. And so I'm just following him and learning along the way. And there's so many things I could tell you about that I've learned, but you can maybe guide me on some specifics that you would like for me to share. But I've just been so blessed to be in this position and have so many wonderful people that are leading and serving alongside of me. It's been a community effort. This nonprofit, this ministry wouldn't be what it is without all of the people that are a part of it and that are serving families alongside of me.
Mm. Well, I think that we'll get to a little bit more about leadership towards the end, but I'd love to, if you don't mind, kind of walking us through sort of your story and how what you went through changed your life. If you could walk us kind of through all of that, we would so appreciate it.
Yeah. So I mentioned to you that my husband and we had a daughter named Bridget, and she was stillborn at 24 weeks because I had what was called a subchorionic hemorrhage. And I was actually on bed rest from 13 weeks until 24 weeks. So 11 weeks. And during that time frame, we were going to the hospital. I was hospitalized several times. I had appointments where the doctors were saying, this is really serious. We don't know how much longer you'll be able to stay pregnant. And she's very growth restricted. And so we're not sure we'll be able to intervene to save her life. And obviously, as first-time parents, as any parents would be hearing that news, we were just devastated and heartbroken and anxious and worried about her life and what would happen. And my mom, likewise, was feeling the same way. And she's actually a postpartum nurse at that same hospital, and she knits. And so she went home and wanted to knit this little blanket for Bridget and have something special when she was born. And when she made the little blanket, she thought, how would I swaddle a really tiny baby in this blanket? That's when God gave her the idea to knit the sides up and turn it into a little cradle. I know that listeners cannot see it, but I'm showing you the little cradle, and we do have pictures on our website and social media. And so she had made this little cradle for us and packed it in her hospital bag. And when Bridget was born on October 22nd, 2014, we were able to hold her in it, and it just changed everything for us. I mean, we were in the midst of the greatest sadness we had ever known and such heartbreak and grief. But in the middle of that pain, we had this blessing and this comfort of being able to see her and love on her and hold her in this dignified and special way. And really, after we experienced that, we knew we wanted to comfort other people with that same comfort. And so my mom started making more for our local hospital, and I started writing on a blog. I made a website, and really from that, God has grown the organization to be what it is now. We had a news story early on that aired nationwide, and that going viral on Yahoo News, that really allowed a lot of hospitals to find out about us. And so very quickly, we realized there was a nationwide need, that there were hospitals all across the country that didn't have resources and, these little cradles to hold babies that are born in the second trimester of pregnancy. And so we became a nonprofit in 2015. And at this point, had just started in her nursery. I mean, in her empty nursery, that's where the ministry started. I made this website on a little laptop. I mean, we had very little resources at the time. In the 6 years that we've now been a nonprofit, God has grown us. We now have our own headquarters building. We have now are in over 1,050 hospitals in all 50 states. We donate and bless over 26,000 bereaved families a year with our cradles and memory keepsakes. So God has just done so much. We now have our own support groups that we do in person and online called Hope Gatherings. We do an annual event called Wave of Light on October 15th, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. And so there's just so many different ways that he's allowed us to comfort families and share the hope of heaven through faith in Jesus with families that are grieving their baby. And yeah, that's our story. It's been a journey, and we're just following God each step of the way of where he wants us to be going and what we should be doing and how we should be ministering to families. So that's where we're at right now.
It sounds like this is really a beauty from ashes type story, a very redeeming story, because it had to have felt like the worst day of your life. And for you to be able to kind of come out of that and be able to start this ministry, I just think is such an example of redemption. As you were kind of walking through the grief process and sort of at the beginning stages, did you have anyone that walked with you through that? And sort of what did they do that made the biggest difference in your grief and really helped you kind of through that?
Yeah. So I have a really great family, and my husband's family is wonderful, and both families have been so supportive and loving. And during our grief with Bridget, and just acknowledging her life and her place in our family, and saying her name, including her in, in our family traditions, when we have Christmas with both of our families, she has a stocking, she has ornaments on our trees, and we talk about her all the time. And so having that safe place to share her life and for her to be acknowledged in our family has meant so much. Also, I will say from early on, so the cemetery that Bridget's buried at, she was born on October 22nd. And in this little area where she was buried, it's kind of like their baby area where infants are buried. And just a couple of weeks prior, there was a baby named Jack who had passed away on October 6th. And so when we went to have her funeral, we noticed that there was a fresh grave there. And immediately my heart, I just wanted to reach out to this family, because I was like, I hadn't known anyone that had gone through this. And here was this other precious baby in heaven, and this family who was right there grieving alongside of us. And so I reached out on Facebook to the mother. Her name's Casey, and her and I became such close friends. And we just immediately connected in our pain and in our heartbreak. And we walked through those early days of grief and suffering together, and we were able to support each other through the holidays and through our due dates, that had come and passed, and then the first heaven day for each of our babies. And her and I now, we are still great friends. She's been a part of the ministry from the beginning. She's on our board. Her husband's on the board. They serve in the ministry, and just having other women. And since then, I've had many more friends that have lost babies that have come into the ministry through our support groups and whatnot, that have become close friends. And just having other women that understand the pain and can relate to you in a way that other people can't, because it's just an isolating experience to go through. And knowing that you're not alone, and knowing that you can grieve with other people, and in our case, serve with other women that have gone through it, has been so healing for me and healing for these women as well. So I would say that's been a huge part of my journey, is having other women to walk with and to kind of hold me up in my grief, and likewise mutually support them on their hard days and in their hard moments. And then also having the ability to use our grief for good and serve other people. That has been a huge part of my healing and something that I am an advocate for whenever I talk with other women, whether it's serving in a nonprofit or finding some way to use your time and talents for good. It's just so healing in the middle of heartbreak. So those would be my recommendations, is to find a community to grieve with and find a community to serve.
I love that. And I'm wondering if you could give just some advice or guidance to those of us who may not have gone through what you've gone through, but may have people in our lives who are either dealing with infertility, miscarriage, stillbirth, the loss of an infant, like any of those type of things that you could help us to just figure out how to come alongside those people that we know, because it seems like such an intense thing. And if you're not super close to someone, it may be a hard situation to walk into, but there's always ways that we can help and encourage. And I know, as someone who's dealt with infertility, people say really stupid things. And I don't think it's with a malicious intent. I think they just truly don't know what to say. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, if you could give any guidance to our listeners, because I'm sure we all know someone that's gone through at least one of those types of scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually do have this resource on our website as well. So I'll share my thoughts on it. But if anyone is wanting like a really great resource where we list out ways that you can care for a friend or family member who's going through this, it's on our website. It's called Caring for, I think it's bridgetscradles.com/caring. And there's a list of things that you can do like in the initial weeks, like right after someone's lost a baby, but even in the years to come, because a lot of times people are really great about being there like right away. But then as time goes on, you're left alone, or, the year after you've lost a baby, Mother's Day is still going to be hard. Your baby's heaven day is going to still be hard. And so whenever you can put those hard days in a calendar and follow up with your friend and your family member and just acknowledge that they're going to be grieving. And if they named their baby, saying their baby's name. One thing I think that people are always worried about is like, well, I don't want to bring it up or make them sad because I talk about their baby or ask them about their grief. But I can assure you that a grieving mom is not all of a sudden going to be reminded of her baby or reminded of her grief. You're not going to make her sad. She's already sad. She's already thinking of her baby. And so just being willing to listen and willing to sit in their pain with them goes so far. You don't have to have the perfect words to say. Just even saying, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you're going through. My heart's breaking for you. That goes so much further than trying to offer up some sort of explanation or fix, like you were saying, where people try to say things like, oh, you must be going through this for a reason. Or if you've lost a baby, oh, well, you're young, you can try again. Or you already have other living children. I mean, awful things that they're not trying to be insensitive, but they come across very insensitive, and it's just not the right thing to say. And so truly just being willing to listen and sit with someone in their grief and let them talk about their baby and talk about the pain that they're going through or how hard things have been and what it's like to journey in those shoes, that goes so far. And I think especially in our culture today, people are so uncomfortable with grief. I think we just want people to push it down, pretend that they're okay, act like they're strong, move on, go back to being normal. But I think there's something to be said about just giving someone permission to grieve and sitting in their sadness with them and acknowledging their baby and saying their baby's name. It just speaks volumes for that person. So that would be my suggestion. And then on our website, we talk about some like really practical ways that you can show up for a friend. Things like, meeting physical needs, like bringing a meal or helping with chores around their house. There's specific things and ways that you can communicate that versus just saying, let me know if you need anything, how you can be really tangible and practical about that. And saying, I want to bring you a meal would Friday work, or would it be better if I came on Monday? Something like that. And so we have a lot of ideas on there. We also have like gift ideas, thoughtful bereavement gifts. We really love the company called Laurel Box. They offer bereavement gifts that are curated specifically for grieving moms, and they just have such beautiful, thoughtful items. And so we have Laurel Box listed on our website, but you can also go to their website, and they've got a beautiful Pinterest page with lots of ideas to help if you don't know what to give a friend. So those are probably my top suggestions on how to care for someone that's gone through this.
I love that you mentioned that, because I did have a friend within the past 6 months to a year who experienced a miscarriage. And I remember I was literally scouring the internet to try and find the appropriate thing to send, because I wanted to mark this for her, that I knew that this was significant and that, I was there for her, and that I wanted to give her something that was meaningful. And it was a weird experience to go through the internet and try to find things that felt appropriate, that felt the appropriate amount of intimacy, I guess is the way to put it, because it's a very intimate thing that's happening. And to be able to mark that with dignity and love rather than just flippancy and cliches, like it was very difficult. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think there's definitely a hole to fill there for people.
Yes. And that's just to go back to Laura Box, that's their mission. So I'm friends with them. That's why I'm sharing this, because I just love their mission. Their mission is to support the supporters, because so often the supporters don't know what to do. They want to be thoughtful. They want to give something of significance and meaning and value. But oftentimes you don't know what to give. And so that's what I love about them, is they're putting so much thought into something that's going to be so meaningful. And like you said, mark that moment and give them the opportunity for that relationship to grow even stronger with your friend or your family member. Because I can guarantee you, I know, because I've been on the receiving end of thoughtful gifts from people, that means so much to me and makes me realize, wow, this friend cares for me so much to have gotten me a necklace with my baby's name or with her birthstone. I mean, how thoughtful is that? And that's only strengthened my friendships when people do things like that. And so that's what I think the world needs more of, is just knowing how to support and love people through these hard times. Because when you have friends that are with you through the darkest days and through your greatest heartbreak, those friendships are going to be your strongest friendships through the rest of your life, through the other trials in your life and through the good times too. And so I think you learn a lot about friendships when you're going through grief and when you're walking through those trials, and having resources like that available and knowing what to do is something I'm passionate about. So definitely check them out, and our website as well, and Etsy and, Pinterest. There's so many great ways now. And I'm thankful that people are paying attention to that more and learning those things that can be meaningful to people going through grief.
Yeah. So I'm so curious, as you were kind of going through this journey and you realized that there was a need that you could fill, what sort of made you actually realize that you could turn your grief into action and start this? I can imagine that you felt overwhelmed but yet probably motivated at the same time. And so there's a lot of competing emotions. So how did you kind of get to the point where you realized, you could start this and that there was a need there that you could fill?
Yeah, it started actually in a moment of deep, deep grief and deep questioning. I actually had just gotten back from the hospital. I still had my hospital wristband on, and I just collapsed in her nursery, and I was just on the floor in the fetal position, and I was crying, and I was just crying out to God. I believed in Jesus. I had been walking with him before. And so I knew that she was in heaven and that I could see her again. But I think I was wrestling with God and saying, okay, God, if this is true, if my daughter is in heaven and I have the opportunity through the gospel to see her again, then everything else that Jesus says is true, and everything in the Bible and his word is true. And my life should be radically different if that's what I believe. And I think for me, that was just this surrender moment of saying, okay, Jesus, I'm going to believe that you are who you say you are. And I'm going to put my faith and my trust in the fact that I do get to see her again. And that even though I'm grieving with hope. And if that's true, then I want to live radically different until I get to see her again. And so I didn't know at that exact moment what God was going to do, but I remember very clearly surrendering and saying, God, I'll do anything for you, anything at all. Like, I'm yours to do what you want. And that's to me when Bridget's Cradle started, even though I didn't really know that it was going to be a nonprofit with the cradles and, the support groups, and we're about to start a podcast. I mean, God has just kind of walked us along the way and told us what we should be doing along the journey. But just having that moment of surrender and obedience, that's where it started. And then God's just led the way and shown us the needs and shown us the next step in obedience that we should be taking. And he's grown it along the way according to his timing and his plan. So that's really how it started, was just in this moment of grief and sadness. And it wasn't some overnight thing that we were able to do all of this. It was just one small step of obedience after another, and God leading the way and opening up doors and closing doors and pivoting us. COVID happened and we ended up launching a support group online, and we had planned to do that eventually, but it was 2020 that really pushed us to say, yes, this is a need. And now that we are meeting in person again, we're still offering the online version because now we have moms all across the country that are tuning in and getting to be able to be a part of our support ministry. So God's just done that as we've walked through it. And I'm just honored to get to follow him and see what he has in store and where he wants to take us. So that's, I guess, a part of being a leader is just relying on him and seeing what it is that he has for us and just taking one step at a time, following him.
Yeah. So you mentioned when you put in your application to be on the podcast that, you've been able to build this ministry on a small budget. And so I'm wondering kind of how you've been able to do that, and if there have been any other roadblocks as you're kind of building the ministry and how you've been able to navigate those. And I'm sure you have lots of stories of God sort of showing up and delivering and kind of being true to his word. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yes, he is so faithful. He has provided for every need and been so faithful through this journey. And like you said, we have a small budget. We primarily have run on 50,000, just to throw out a number, of a budget, and have a nationwide impact. So we're a small Kansas nonprofit with a small team, but we're able to have a large impact. And the secret to that has been volunteers. We have the most amazing team of volunteers. We have hundreds of knitters and crocheters that live all across the country, I think representing 45 different states. So our knitters and crocheters that are actually making the cradles, they can live anywhere because they make them on their own according to our patterns and our guidelines. And then they ship them here to our headquarters. And then we have a team of local sewing volunteers that sew the lace and the trim, the ribbon, the charms. We have a little cross charm on every single cradle. And then our administrative team tags them and prepares them in our hospital boxes and ships them out to the hospitals from here. And all of our donations go toward those shipping costs so that hospitals and families don't have to pay a single penny for the cradles. They're completely free for the hospitals and the families. And so really just harnessing the power of volunteers and having this amazing team of people, both across the country and locally, that allow our mission to continue. Our core team of administrative, like our internal team, myself included, we're unpaid. We do this for free. We're just so passionate about this ministry that we're willing to sacrifice, salary and do this. And that's allowed our donations to go straight into the nonprofit, into our operations, our programs, our services. Mm. So without having a lot of overhead, we're able to do a lot with a little because we have so many amazing volunteers that are giving of their time and their talents and their, services to make this happen. And so I am just so honored. We have two other women that have left paying jobs to do this full time, which is just amazing and just so selfless and generous. And we've just been really blessed by our team and people rallying around this mission and this calling that God's given us, and just so compassionate to the grieving and to people that are grieving their babies and wanting to provide this comfort and this hope. So that would be, I think, the secret, I guess, if you want to call it that, to doing a lot with a little, is having an amazing team of people who are selfless and are serving around the same mission and wanting to serve people. I mean, many of our team members are serving in memory of their own babies in heaven, but some people are just serving because they're compassionate toward that and they're doing this out of their own calling for God. And so it's just neat to see the kingdom working together and people using their different skills and talents, because I can't knit or crochet or sew, but God has given me other talents that I use for the ministry. And likewise, there's each person in the ministry is using what they have and giving what they can. And it's a beautiful thing to see it all come together.
I love that. I love the fact that, you're so willing to say, like, I don't knit or crochet. And that's, so much of the basis of the ministry. And yet you have this huge impact because, you have the life experience that having gone through it and how the Lord has worked in your life. So I just love that. You talked a lot about volunteers and how they've been a huge impact on your ministry. And I'd love for you to talk about any sort of lessons or maybe how you get such great volunteers. I know that we have a lot of women who serve in ministry, and volunteerism is a huge part of that, having people serve within their gifts. But oftentimes it can be difficult to either get people behind the vision, behind the purpose, to really see how they fit in there and to really ignite a passion in them. And so I would just love to know your thoughts on that, your advice, anything along those lines that you have for anyone else in ministry.
Yeah. So I would say the number one thing when you have volunteers is connecting the volunteer to the impact and to what they're doing. And so making the volunteer, the hero of the story. So for example, when we word things with our volunteers, we don't say the volunteers are serving Bridget's Cradles, that they're working for Bridget's Cradles. They're serving the grieving families through Bridget's Cradles. So the ministry is really just this middle ground where you're connecting people with a need and they're able to directly serve these people. And that might seem, like, oh, that's just a simple thought or way to word things, but it matters in how you communicate with your volunteers. So for example, instead of saying like, we're looking for volunteers to serve Bridget's Cradles and, make cradles for the organization. Well, where's the passion? Where's the vision for that? But when you say, we're looking for people who can knit these cradles that are going to hold God's most precious creation, and they are going to comfort a family in their greatest heartbreak, and your cradle will be sent directly to a hospital to a family and comfort them in their moment of need. Now you're connecting the person that wants to help with the person who needs help. And Bridget's Cradles is really just like the avenue that they can do that through. And I think that's why we have such amazing volunteers, is because we always show the volunteer what their impact is making. And so we try to do a lot of stories and testimonials so they see. We do videos and stories, blog posts and things, sharing the story. So the volunteers sees, when I send a cradle in, this is the impact. This is what the family is saying about how much the cradle meant to them. And that is so motivating, because you're going to be so much more motivated when you're actually making an impact versus just saying, thank you so much for your cradle. You donated a cradle to our organization. It's not about Bridget's Cradles. It's about them. And so that goes the same when you're talking about donors as well. When people donate, instead of saying, will you donate to Bridget's Cradles? Well, it's not about giving money to us. It's about meeting a need through the organization, that your donation will impact these families. And so we have like an annual report that we send to all of our donors and top volunteers that are super committed to the mission, and just really engaging them and connecting them to the mission and showing them what impact they're making is huge. And then on the other side of that is showing appreciation to them. And so volunteer appreciation and donor appreciation is very important to Bridget's Cradles. We do a lot of things where we just want them to know how much we appreciate them. We send handwritten thank you letters. I know that's kind of becoming a thing of the past, but we have people, my mom included, that likes to do that. And so for donors and volunteers, we'll do that because we want them to know we're so grateful for you. Sharing stories and little gifts from time to time. We do a Christmas appreciation party for our volunteers. And I think that really goes a long way in just letting volunteers know how thankful you are, that they are making a difference and they're making an impact in the lives and of these families, and that we couldn't do it without them, that they're just as much a part of this ministry as we are. And so I think that's a huge thing. And I think that's really attracted a lot of amazing people to our organization, is that we do care so much for our volunteers and we make them feel important because they are important.
I love that advice. And it's so foundational to the whole thing. And so I love that you're calling us back to that foundation, because I think a lot of places get so worked up in the minutia and what's this tiny little thing I can do, and, or can I give them a t-shirt? Well, that's great. Like, give them a t-shirt, but what's behind it? And I just love that you gave that perspective. You also mentioned that the ministry does support groups, and I'm sure that's a huge part of the ministry as well. But I'm just wondering, now that you work with women and families that have gone through exactly what you went through, how are you able to minister to them and, maybe at sometimes relive the experience that you went through on your own? How does that impact sort of the support groups, or how you're able to minister to them? And is that so difficult, or is that empowering as well, healing, cathartic too?
Yeah, I think it's important that I do relive it because, and it's not just me. So I lead the support groups, but I have a team of women that are bereaved moms that lead the in-person ones with me. And I think what's so important is when a mom walks in these doors, or whether it's on Zoom, that they are met with love and that they're met with understanding, and they understand and can relate to us through our pain. So even though for me, it's been over 6 years, and for some of our other team members, it's been several years, we still deeply understand and can go back to that place of grief, even though we're not currently in fresh grief and everything, but we certainly remember those feelings and those emotions. And we have a saying that we share whenever we start our support group. We have a little video. It's called our Declaration of Faith that we share. And we use the analogy of like an ocean. And so we say, like, there are people that are in the deep waves of grief, and they're out there, like out in the deep waves, and they're drowning and they're struggling. And then there's some of us that are on the shore. We've been through it, but we've gotten up onto the shore. And so we use the analogy of like, we will go back into the waters to get you, and I don't know, it's just a powerful illustration, I guess, of saying like, even though we're not out there right now and we're not in those waves of grief, we will come back in there and try to bring you, and not to say like, oh, you need to come back on the shore and it's not okay to be grieving. We actually encourage and give you permission to grieve. It's good to grieve, actually. I think you can't heal unless you go through the grief, but it's to say that we're going to come back with you and we're going to relate to you in this pain. And, it's also helpful for those people that are in the waves to see people on shore and say like, okay, with time, with God's support and his comfort, I will one day be there too. That my life is not going to be a perpetual state of agony and misery, and so I think sometimes it's helpful to see people further along in their grief, on the shore of grief, if you use that analogy. And so I think it's imperative that we do use our pain. I would say there's different seasons for me where it's harder than others to enter back into that. But because this is the ministry that I've been in for really ever since Bridget was born. I don't really know anything different. And I think a lot of people will ask me, well, doesn't it make you sad to be in this space, just constantly talking about Bridget and your loss and talking to moms who are fresh in grief? And for me, I see it as a calling from God, and I actually find great joy in doing this, which sounds probably strange to most, but I find joy in living out the calling and the purpose that God has given me, and being able to honor Bridget and mother her, I guess, in this way until I get to see her in heaven, and be able to provide comfort that God's given me to other people and lead people to Jesus that may not have already, had a relationship with him. And so nothing could be more important to me than that. And so it's a joy for me to serve. And it's been healing for me to talk about Bridget and be able to share my grief and my journey and story and, what God has walked me through. So yeah, I know it sounds so strange to say, but I actually really love what I do, and I find great joy in it.
Yeah. So along those lines, do you think that when you go through a traumatic experience, that there's a certain amount of healing time or healing process that you need to go through before you're ready to take on something like what you've built? Or how does someone know that they're ready? God has brought them through this really horrific thing. They've had this traumatic circumstance in their life, and they feel like there might be something that's there that they could do. How does someone know that they're ready to go through that?
I think it's an individual thing, and there's no timeline on grief, and serving in this ministry, I've had moms who have lost a baby, and weeks later, days later, sometimes will reach out to me and say, I heard about your ministry. I want to help. How can I get plugged in and serving? And sometimes I'm almost honestly like, whoa, this is so fresh for you. Let us support you right now. Come to our support groups. Let's love on you, but then I'm like, no, if this is their desire and this is what God's asking them to do, and this is going to bring healing, who am I to say, oh, you're not ready yet. Let's just support you in our support groups, which actually our support group that's in person, it's actually called Support and Serve. And so the first half of the meeting is supporting, and the last part is serving together. And moms just love that because it's something they can do in honor of their baby, knowing something I'm doing tonight, in the space of tagging cradles or preparing a hospital box, this is going to go and impact someone else, and it brings them so much healing. And so, like I said, I've had moms that have come to me very fresh in grief that say, I want to help. And I'm happy to plug them in and use their time and talents for whatever it is that God's calling them to do through the ministry. But there's other people that really just need to be supported through their grief, in the weeks, months, years. And then God will ask them, to do something, whether it's through Bridget's Cradles or it's through something else. I think it's just an individual thing in your own grief and your own walk with God. And for me, God just speaks to me, through my heart and mind, and just kind of plants these seeds. And I think each person kind of experiences God in their own way through the Holy Spirit, and he speaks to people differently. And so I think each person is just individual, but I think you'll know when it's God, prompting you to something, or planting a seed and just kind of putting a thought in your mind of maybe I should do this, or maybe I should look into this, or maybe I should reach out to this person, or maybe I should attend this and see what this is all about. So it's been neat to see, at least in my sphere of ministry, to see how different women have come into the ministry and used their gifts, because it's neat to see God answering their prayers and answering a calling on their life in this way. So I hope that answers your question. But I think it's very individualized and in their own timing and how God works.
Grief is a mysterious thing. So I totally understand and love your answer to that question, because I think that what is painful for some at a certain time can be so healing for others. And therein lies the mystery. So
I just had a support group last night online, and we were talking about this, actually, about using your grief for good and surrendering your suffering. And that's something I'm very passionate about sharing. But the thing that I told them was not to put this pressure on yourself that you need to be doing something good right away, or that you should be starting a nonprofit like I did. It doesn't have to be something that grand or something big, or doesn't need to happen right away. It's going to be in your own time, and not to put this pressure on yourself, that God is going to walk with you, and you need to have that grace for yourself that I'm grieving, and God will show you in his timing what it is that he has for you, some sort of purpose in your pain, but you don't necessarily need to be forcing it or looking for it as you're grieving and healing with God. I think he will just have that, be shown to you in his timing. And so even though it's something I'm passionate about sharing, that I do believe God can bring beauty from ashes and will bring purpose from pain, not to put this pressure on yourself that you have to create this thing when you're in the middle of grieving. I think God will show that to you, and he'll call you to that. And it will be something that isn't a pressure, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because that can make it harder when you're grieving of, oh, now I have to also be trying to do this or that. I think it will come naturally, and God will put the people or the place or the thing in front of you that it is that he has for you. And it might not be right away. It might be years later. You just never know how he's going to redeem pain. So.
I love that. So we have talked about loneliness in leadership before, and I'm just wondering if you've faced this while you are leading Bridget's Cradles, and maybe what you've done to combat the loneliness, because as you're kind of being the head, the sort of person that's being the direction, the person that's kind of rallying the troops, if you will, it can get really lonely and it can get really discouraging. And so I'm just wondering if you face that and how you've kind of combat it in your own leadership.
Yeah, I think even though I have an amazing team of women that serve with me and amazing volunteers for the organization, certainly when you're at the top of the leadership and you are the one making the decisions. And I mean, we have a board of directors and we have 2 advisory councils. And so by no means am I saying that I am solely responsible for the decisions of Bridget's Cradles, but there is a weight of, directing, and for me, following our CEO, which I say is God, following him and just having that weight of wanting to make the right decisions that honor him and that are the right decisions for the ministry. And so there is definitely some loneliness, even though, like I said, I have an amazing team. Our roles are different. Our responsibilities are different. And so I think sometimes it's hard for people to understand where I'm at and what it feels like. And so for me, especially recently coming out of COVID and having to navigate leading a ministry through that and making a lot of decisions through our culture and through just very tumultuous times, I have been trying right now to seek out friendships with other Christian women leaders, even if it's not in, pregnancy and infant loss bereavement space, just other Christian women leaders, whether it's in the church or other nonprofits or businesses. Just having other people that understand the dynamic of leadership and of that weight is so helpful for me. And, I'm still working through that and trying to find kind of that tribe, if you will. But I've found some women, and having mentors in that area and having people that you can encourage and that can encourage you is something that I'm seeking and that I've found, but I'm continuing to do that. And eventually a vision that I have is to have kind of like a little group, I guess, of Christian women that I can have like a little team of women in different leadership capacities to have to support each other. Because I think that's so important, especially when you're in that role, that you have people that are further along than you or in different spaces, because you can learn so much from church leaders and leaders in business, even though we're not a business where we don't sell anything. We don't have a product that we're selling, but there's a lot that you can learn from an entrepreneur or someone in a different space. So I would say that's kind of where I'm at right now, and still have a lot to learn and still have a lot of progress to make. But I think that is an answer to finding support when you feel lonely, when you're at the top in leadership.
It sounds like you're talking one of our past guests has talked about sort of your own personal board of directors or cabinet, like the president has a cabinet. And it was so interesting. She talked about the different types of people that you need on that board or on that cabinet or in that tribe. And I just loved how she talked about like a cheerleader and a shameless promoter and someone who gives you accountability, someone who can kind of poke holes in your ideas, but do it with like love. And so I just love that idea of how women in leadership can really support each other. And I think it's true what you're saying about having someone who's kind of even outside of your space, outside of your direct report, your direct ministry, someone who's just completely outside that can give you insight onto what you're going through and those sorts of things. And I think that those tribes are so important. You mentioned mentors. Have you had any mentors as you've walked through this that have been really pivotal in your leadership or in your journey? And they don't have to be direct mentors, people that are maybe farther off that you follow their sort of life and leadership in how they portray it out.
Yeah. So also kind of to go back to what you were saying before, like the cabinet and everything, at the beginning of 2020, we had launched advisory councils for our nonprofit. And that has been so wonderful to have. So we actually have two. We have one that's called bereavement and medical. And those people are like funeral home directors, counselors. We have church people. We have medical staff from hospitals that deal with bereavement, labor and delivery, that kind of thing. And so that's kind of, those people are giving us outside advice and insight to the ministry from the bereavement and medical side. And then we started an advisory council called our Development and Strategy Council. And that is more on like the side of the nonprofit of like fundraising and marketing and how do we get the word out about our nonprofit and that kind of thing and grow this so that this ministry can outlive my lifetime, because right now, like I told you, we don't have paid staff. We don't have our own building that's been paid for. And so eventually we want to have those things. And so we have this council and it's been really nice to have people. So there's nonprofit leaders on there that are outside of our space and like really different space. Like we have an executive director that leads a nonprofit that it's called Doc's Friends. And it's actually the Doc, it's a warbird plane. And he has so much insight and help for us, even though it's a very different nonprofit. And so just learning from other people who are managing larger nonprofits, managing different things, they have insight that can come back to what we're doing. And we have on our team a former news anchor and a former United Way president. And so there's just so many people that you can learn from that have different experiences. And so I would say those teams and those councils has been instrumental for our nonprofit. And if you're listening and you have a nonprofit, I would highly suggest having advisory councils because I think sometimes you need people outside of your space. Because like our board of directors, if you go onto our website and look, it's all people that have a very close relationship with our ministry and have gone through it ourselves. And so we all are very united in our mission and our vision and are making really great decisions, I think, for the organization. But I think you also need people that are outside of it that can give you a healthy outside of the box thinking and come up with new and fresh ideas that you're too close to the organization to see. Especially for me, I feel like because it's my daughter and it's our family and it's our life, I think sometimes I'm so close to it that I can't see a perspective outside of it. And so having those advisors come in and offer their ideas and their experience has been so influential to me. And for us, our council is a 2-year term. And so we will constantly be having new and fresh people kind of diving in and learning our nonprofit and giving us these ideas and having those relationships even beyond their term. Of course, it'll still be, friends to the organization, but having more and more people and influence into the ministry, I think will be so beneficial to us. And I think for any nonprofit would be helpful.
I love that advice. I think that's wonderful and just supports the idea that we all have a purpose. We all have strengths that we can give, and not one person is completely suited to do everything. We need to really lean on each other. And so I love that. So, as we wrap up, we believe that leaders are learners on this podcast, and we know that our guests are usually in touch with some really great resources, whether it's books or podcasts or any other type of resource. So, I'm wondering if there's anything that you've been learning lately or reading lately that has been helpful to you that you would share with our audience.
Yeah. Well, I love podcasts. And so obviously your listeners are already on the right track listening to your podcast on women leadership. And so I would strongly suggest continuing to listen to this podcast and other leadership podcasts. One of my other favorite ones is Pastor Craig's and the Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast. I love listening to that one. Specifically through the year of COVID, he just had a lot of great insight about essentially, instead of looking at COVID as a challenge to your nonprofit or to your church or to your business, looking at it as an opportunity to grow and innovate and come up with new ways to minister to people. Yeah. And surprisingly enough, you talked about, have we had challenges with having a smaller budget? And so we expected 2020 for us to take a hit on donations and for us to kind of struggle to provide, our operations and programs. But interestingly enough, 2020 was our year of the greatest amount of donations that we've had come in. People were just so generous during that year, and God was faithful to provide. And also for us, we weren't able to do like in-person events because of COVID, but we became really innovative in how can we serve people. And so, for example, we normally have a bereaved Mother's Day brunch here, but instead of doing it in person, we did a donut drive up. And so moms would come up and drive up into our parking lot, and we would bring donuts and orange juice and a little personalized gift with their baby's name on it and do that and show them love. And we stood 6 feet apart and we prayed for them and got to see them face to face. And so that, and then for Wave of Light, we couldn't do our candlelight vigil in person. And so instead we did this drive where we had 50,000 pink, blue, and white lights lit up on a 1/4-mile stretch. And all the families could drive through this lit up road. And when they entered in, their baby's name was said over a speaker. And I say all that, and you should definitely go check out that video because it was so amazing. We had a drone videographer take footage of this beautiful display of lights in memory of babies in heaven. And all that to be said, I think what we learned in 2020 was there are ways that you can still connect with people and show them love and show them support that are safe. And that's what we tried to do. Like I said, launching the online support group, and really that podcast and listening to Pastor Craig talk about how for his church, Life Church, how they found ways to innovate and to continue spreading the gospel and sharing hope with people. For me as a leader, that was where I wanted to go. I didn't want to shut everything down and live in fear. I wanted to do things in a safe way, but I also wanted to be shining the light of Jesus in a really dark and difficult time. And for these families who are grieving the loss of their baby, grief is already isolating and dark enough. And then top that onto COVID when you can't see people and you can't go to support groups anymore or to church and all these things. And so that was instrumental for me last year, was like looking at it as an opportunity to serve and how can we do things differently and safely, but still provide very tangible support and love to these families. So
I love that. So as we are kind of at the very end, I would love for you to let people know the best way to connect with you if they are interested in serving with you, if they're interested in creating the cradles, if they feel like this is something that they could do. Is there different capacities that people could help, and how do they get that information and connect with you?
Yes. So they can go onto our website, which is bridgetscradles.com. At the top, there's a tab that says volunteer. And if you're local to Wichita, Kansas, there's a local tab. If you are wanting to knit or crochet, you can live anywhere in the country. And there's a little drop down where you can apply for that. Also, like I told you, we run completely on donations. And so if people are wanting to financially support us, we have our donate page. We have a section on ways that you can give materials like actual ribbon and charms and things. We have a wish list on there that people can find all of that. Also, there's memorial giving, giving in memory of a baby. And we actually will put your baby's name on the hospital box and take pictures of it and send that to you as it ships out, which is really special to see. And so our website would be one avenue. We also have a Facebook and Instagram page. And then I have my personal Facebook and Instagram, which is Ashely Opliger. And on there, I do a lot of blogging about Bridget's Cradles and grief and all of that, but also just general faith-based topics and leadership, ministry, all of that. So you can find me on there as well.
Wonderful. Well, I encourage our listeners to go check all of that out. And if this conversation has pricked your heart or has been a part of, this has been a part of your journey, I would just encourage you to go check it out, the resources that they have. So thank you so much, Ashely, for being with us and for sharing your heart so eloquently and vulnerably. And we so appreciate what you're doing and that you're willing to talk to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I was so honored.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast, and it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.